Good evening, gentlemen. Lawrenceofasia coming at you from South Korea, and in today's episode I want to talk to you all about the difference of Korea versus Japan. Which one is better? So Korea versus Japan. Now we've got a lot to talk about. We've got food, culture, people, interaction with foreigners, how do people engage, but right off the top I want to tell you, gentlemen, probably biggest question you all are going to have, since this is a men's channel, who is easier to approach? Which women are more friendly to you as a foreign man? And I have to say, hands down, that would be the Japanese women. They are far more feminine, far more receptive and responsive to foreign men, especially when not speaking the local language well. And even if one is speaking the local language well, I would say still by far that the Japanese women are far more receptive and responsive, okay? So I'm going to just open up my notes here, and I'm going to break down some of the things that I want to talk about, pardon me, gentlemen. Some of the topics I want to cover in this video. And so I've got Korea versus Japan. And I want to talk about the friendliness of the people, also the friendliness of the women, the helpfulness of the two people, how helpful they are to you as a foreigner and how helpful they are to each other, their English ability, responsiveness when speaking the local language, like I mentioned, how conformist each society is, right? How free-thinking they are. I want to talk about the women, but I'll cover that last. Interaction amongst men and women, I'll cover that last. The ease of travel within each country, quite important. Also the cost of travel within each country. And the food, cost of food, quality of food, the coffee culture, tons of cafes in Korea, like an insane amount. Prices amongst places to stay, accommodation, hostels, hotels, food, drinks, etc. I'll cover that. And also parks, natural spaces. Which environment is nicer, like has a nicer outdoor environment, right? All right, attitude towards foreigners, I think I mentioned that. Women, and then also feminist culture within, pardon me, gentlemen, I'm just adjusting the lighting here. It's a little overcast here on the mountain, just trying to get the lighting right for you all, and I'm just hoping that it stays on the adjustment that I'm trying to set here so you can see me well and I'm not too bright. All right, so all right, gentlemen, I'm going to talk about the friendliness of the people first off. Now, I've spent a great deal of time in both Japan and Korea. I've probably been to Japan about 8 times if I had to guess. I've spent about 1 year of my life total there, at least 9 months I'd say. Probably an entire year of my life, if not more. And then I've also spent at least a year in Korea. At least a year of my life has been spent here in Korea, probably at least 15 months if I had to guess. I've got 2 children here in South Korea with a South Korean woman who things are going well. I'll just say that. Let's see. So the friendliness of the two societies, gentlemen, Japanese folks are far more helpful to you as a foreigner. It's been my experience. Even though the average person doesn't speak as good English in Japan, I would say, they're far more willing to help a foreigner find out where they're trying to help them to go where they need to go. I've even seen the police do this in Japan, where they're almost like tour guides. If you have a question, you ask a police, they'll literally guide you all the way to where you need to go. I myself was looking for a particular hotel one time, and I just had the address, and I think I had a phone number. And this gentleman, I didn't have internet on my phone, right? This gentleman actually was about 70, 80 years old, and he walked me, asked people for directions, and walked me all the way to my hotel, walked me into the front desk, introduced me, and very gracefully said, have a great day and wish me well, and was gone, just vanished like that. So that's not uncommon at all in Japan. That's actually very common. And I think it's quite easy to have and experience something similar to this. It's happened to me many times. and would most likely happen to you as a foreigner if you did spend any amount of time in Japan, 1-2 weeks. All right, so the friendliness. Now, Koreans also are not very friendly with each other. That's just the God honest truth. They have a society where they have a high degree of expectation and responsibility for your role and how you're supposed to behave there within society. And they follow those roles quite well, what others expect from them and so forth. They follow those roles well. But just in general, there's a lot of hate in the hearts of a lot of Koreans. You feel it. I smile at people. I greet people very graciously whichever country I'm in. And I think there's no country I've ever been to in my entire life where the people are on average as rude or completely unresponsive as South Korea. And I hate to say that. I mean, I have a lot of South Korean friends here. I've got family here. And I do love the people. I even love those people that are, that are quite cold. But I would say they're some of the coldest people in the world. Now, on the contrary, the Japanese people are probably the warmest people. They're some of the warmest people. They're also kept to themselves quite a bit, as are Koreans. But they are very, very warm people. They're very, very sincere. They're incredibly sincere. And they also they have a very, very harmonious society in and with of themselves. So do Koreans, but Korean society, I think, is a bit more toxic on average. I think there's a lot of mental health issues in both countries, two of the highest suicide rates in the world. You all might believe that Japan has the highest suicide rate in the world. That's actually no longer true. It's now been Korea for quite some time, but Korea's got the highest child suicide rate amongst all age ranges, including young children. So the friendliness goes to Japan by a long shot. All right. Secondly, what do we have here on the list, gentlemen? Let's see. Helpfulness. Yeah, we went over that already, didn't we? Okay, so the Japanese are far more helpful. Now, English ability. Now, on average, Koreans can speak English a little better. They'll all say they can't speak English, but they can more often than Japanese. Japanese English proficiency is very, very, very low on average, next to none. And Korean English proficiency, they do use a lot of English words, and they are able to understand more English than you may imagine, and many Koreans can speak English very well. Even gentlemen who might be 50, 60 years old, oftentimes they speak perfect English, and it's very, very surprising. You will not generally find that in Japan ever. That doesn't generally happen. All right, so responsiveness when speaking the local language. Now, this one's kind of interesting, right? So I speak a fair amount of Japanese and Korean, almost an equal amount in both. I may speak slightly more Japanese, at least I used to. And the thing about Japanese versus Koreans when speaking the local language is this. When you speak to Koreans and you do not speak perfectly, if you speak elementary, like almost baby, if you speak, say like elementary or baby Korean, you're almost mocked and not appreciated for not speaking properly. It's almost like they want to ignore you because you're not speaking properly. They don't want to try to understand what it is that you're trying to say. Whereas exactly the opposite in Japan. In Japan, if you're speaking, just simple vocabulary and words, the Japanese almost treat you like a baby who's trying to speak for the first time. They're very present with you, and they're trying to grasp what it is that you're saying, and they're very patient. So, and I mean, generally, they're not trying to understand you like a baby. They can comprehend you, but I find it to be quite opposite in Korea, and oftentimes I feel like I'm speaking relatively clear Korean, and I just get either ignored or they'll act as though they can't understand. I'll repeat myself several times, and then finally they say, oh. In Japan, that didn't really happen much at all. So maybe Japanese is just a little easier to pronunciate. That could be part of it as well. But the responsiveness when speaking basic Japanese versus basic Korean, I think you get a lot more of a warm response in Japan. All right. Still, in both countries, to speak 10, 20 words, 100 words, basic vocabulary will go a long way and will be very much appreciated in either culture. And you should know how to say thank you and things like this. But you can find all that information on another video, gentlemen. I'm not here to teach language, though I can do that as well. Let's see here. Conformist societies. Both Japan and Korea are incredibly conformist societies, meaning they want to fit in. They both basically go by the motto, the nail that sticks out gets hammered down. Nobody wants to stand out in either country. However, there is a new part of Korean, new young generation that does a lot of extremist things to stand out, but it's still somehow, I still feel that they're very, very much conformist in their head. Which one is more conformist? I have a hard time saying for sure. I really don't know. I think that Koreans are more conformist out of fear, and Japanese are more conformist out of the idea of harmony, but it could also be fear and conformity. I'm not really sure. But both are incredibly conformist societies, so you don't find people that are ultra unique generally. Not as often as you would in the Western countries per se. All right, I hope that makes sense, gentlemen. Now, I'm going to talk about women and the interaction with the women as a foreign man towards the end here, so just stay tuned. The ease of travel, gentlemen. Korea I would have to say is easier for travel, and it's far more affordable. The trains are more affordable. Even the flights within Korea and going to other countries, I think, are perhaps more affordable, at least within Korea, versus the flights within Japan. Japan is more expensive. It might be as much as 50% more expensive. It is an expensive country to travel, especially to have nicer places. Harder to come by. In Korea, it's easier to come by nicer places, easier to come by higher quality at a lesser price. Similar to Southeast Asia, but it's far more expensive than Southeast Asia and Korea. So the ease of travel definitely goes to Korea. On average, people do speak more English here as well. That helps, but there's also just a lot more affordable accommodation. The food is also more affordable when you go out, and you go out to have a meal. You can have a meal very easily for anywhere from $5 to $10 range, quite easily here in South Korea. In Japan, you can as well, but on average, the food is more expensive in Japan. Okay, I would say on average, let's just say like 30 to 50% more. Okay, all right. So ease of travel, that goes to Korea for sure. Now, which country is better to travel? That may go to Japan. Okay, I think it does, but a lot of that has to do with the quality of the parks, gentlemen. The parks, the koens. Yoyogi Koen in Tokyo, like my favorite park in the entire world, because you just see people doing all these amazing things, like playing any instrument you could ever imagine, juggling acts, clown acts, children's acts, anything and everything you can imagine, drum circles, people acting, people performing choreography, anything and everything you could imagine. It's all being orchestrated and practiced in the parks there within Japan. So the parks, the natural spaces in Japan are absolutely amazing. The parks are incredible. Yoyogi Koen being my favorite in Tokyo, one of my absolute favorite parks in the world. And the natural spaces here in Korea, it was built so fast that they do not really have enough natural spaces, enough parks here in South Korea. It's one of the downsides of Seoul, South Korea here actually. And now they do have some nice parks along the Han River, but it's not really very easily accessible. And then I'm actually in a really nice natural space now. I'm sitting here up over the city. I come up here quite often to shoot my videos, not too far from my house. And I'm up on the mountaintop. So the mountains and the hiking here is quite accessible in Korea. So you do have a lot of mountains around, a lot of hiking here within short distance within here within the Seoul, Incheon region, right? So you do have that, but the natural spaces, because of the super easy accessibility to parks within Japan, that goes to Japan, and that also makes it probably the best place to travel, in my opinion. Also correlating with the women being easier to approach. Okay, the food. The quality of the food, they're both absolutely amazing. I'm not going to put one above the other. I love the home cooking in Korea and the fermentation and all the fermented foods that they have in South Korea. I think it's a healthier diet. I think it's the healthiest diet in the world. The true, authentic home cooking. They spend so much time in preparation for their foods here in South Korea. They have, probably they spend the most time on their food of any culture in the world. So kimchi it is. South Korea, probably the best food culture, but Japan, oftentimes when I go out to restaurants, even in Korea, I like to go to Japanese restaurants. I like Japanese cuisine quite a lot. So that barely goes to Japan. They're both amazing. And obviously for sushi and so forth, that all originated in Japan. You'd be best in Japan. They have, I think, when it comes to going out to restaurants, if you're not worried about the price point, then I could very well say, yeah, Japan wins hands down, okay? However, from a price to quality ratio, I think in Korea wins that one. All right, so coffee culture, gentlemen. Now, you go out to cafes, you go out to bars. I should talk bar culture as well. They have an insane number of bars here in South Korea, but very few of them will you find foreigners or people who speak any amount of English, or where you really feel welcome, right? Kind of the same thing in Japan, but I do feel a lot more welcome when I step into any random bar in Japan. But let's go to coffee culture. In South Korea, you've got more cafes than you do people, actually, believe it or not. It's absolutely crazy. You have more cafes than you do people. It's not actually the case, but it almost seems that way. There are cafes everywhere you go, up, down, left, right, center, and I think it has something to do with the government funding these cafes, perhaps giving them some sort of grants on a yearly basis, $20,000 or so that they kind of cannot fail per se. Now, I don't know if that's what's going on, but that almost seems as though that's what's going on. I think I've heard something of such as well. So coffee culture, I mean, you visit a infinite number of cafes here in South Korea, and even within the States and other places in the world, you'll see that the Koreans are they're very elaborate with their cafes. They have some really, really interesting, cool, eclectic, awesome experiential cafes, right? So that hands down goes to Korea. And for tea culture, they have a very high quality tea culture in Japan. That's the highest of high tea cultures. And if you were interested in the women there, they also have a very expensive tea culture where you have what you call what are they called? It's not coming to mind at the they're geisha, right? But geisha is one term for it, but there's another term for it as well. It's not geisha. Hello. So there's a girl taking a picture of me here on the mountain. But I guess I should show you, right? She's running up the mountain. Well, can't quite see them. Anyway, all right. One way to get attention, and I found here in South Korea, this is kind of bizarre, but if you take out a phone and you start filming yourself, or you start going around documenting things, everybody kind of thinks you're a celebrity or whatnot, and it's a good way to get attention. Because I'll tell you this, I mentioned this earlier, which country is easier to get responsiveness from women? Now, Korean women, in my opinion, are the most beautiful women on the entire planet, okay? Hands down. Now, they do have a lot of plastic surgery. They're not all natural. Actually, more than 50% of the women have eye surgery where they've created a double eyelid. They do all kinds of stuff to their face. They're not 100% natural, gentlemen. Even at a very young age, they could be 17, they could have already been having plastic surgery and stuff. So keep that in mind. Now, I still think that the Korean women are by far the most beautiful women in the world, the most beautiful Asian women in the world. However, like I said, they're not natural, and yeah, they are beautiful, but they're incredibly cold. Incredibly cold, and they also just kind of do not care that someone tries to approach them in public. I don't know if it's like super duper taboo, but I've seen it with my friends, myself included. They're just incredibly unresponsive. The most unresponsive women in the entire world by far. Just kind of unbelievably unresponsive, right? All right. Japanese women, the exact opposite. Very curious, very kind, very kawaii, very soft, very feminine. The Korean women, not so feminine, not so friendly, and quite cold. That's the honest truth, gentlemen. But what do you expect with beautiful women, right? Long term, you are more likely to have a successful relationship with a Japanese woman, hands down. That is the word on the street from a great number of men that I do know. All right, so let's see, where are we here? Bar culture. Now, I think I went over this a bit, but I basically already covered the bar culture. Now, prices, I think I went over this as well. Hotels, food, hostels, you're looking at 30 to 50% less price in South Korea. And there are good deals to be found as well. Also car rentals and everything as well. Also potentiality as well. Transportation, everything 30 to 50% less. So that, and for quality, you can get some really, really nice hotels here in South Korea for $100 a night. Some really, really nice places. All right, parks and natural spaces, I went over that as well. It goes to Japan, but Korea's got some amazing mountains and also got some lovely countryside as well. Both of them do. Okay, so here's the meat and potatoes, what you gentlemen stayed for. We're going to go over the attitude towards foreigners. We did that already, didn't we? Did that as well. Yeah, the Japanese women are the most, I think, I would say it like this, gentlemen. The Japanese people, they have the most refined culture perhaps in the entire world. It's the most harmonious society I've ever seen, I've ever experienced. There's something about it where there's this deep peace on the subways, there's this deep peace at the parks, there's this deep peace in the streets, in the cafes, everywhere you go. Now, you have that to a degree in Korea as well, but the level that you have it at in Japan is unlike anything else on the planet. I think that they have the, again, most refined culture in the entire world. That goes to Japan. That's not just versus Korea, that's versus every country in the world. All right, so women and the feminist culture. I've got an interesting point I want to share with you, gentlemen. This is just absolutely crazy. I think there is far more man hating here in South Korea. Also far more woman on woman couples, lesbian couples, far more, which everyone has the right to do what they want to do. That's fine and good, but fine and fair, I should say. However, there are less and less women for the men, right? In Japan, you don't see this type of thing nearly as often, not even 10%, I would say, not even 10% the number of lesbian couples that you have in South Korea. It's a little bit cold up here on the mountain, and I've had an irritated throat. So this will be the last 2 minutes of my video, gentlemen. All right, they have a women's only cabinet section of the government in South Korea, as I understand it. They've passed they've done a lot of things, but they're also the ones pushing the transgender education to the young children, and all that sexual education at a very young age. They're the ones pushing that. Something also that's very, very bizarre and interesting about South Korea is that they have at many of the box stores, the big stores here in Korea, where the majority of people get their food and they go shopping and whatnot. Probably 50% of all commerce goes through these big stores, kind of like Walmart's, but different. They have parking spots that are designated, like H Mart is one, I think it's Lotte Mart rather. where they're designated for women only. Okay, and it may not be H Mart, I think it is several of them, where they have these women only designated parking spots, and they're basically like handicapped parking spots. It's what would be the best parking spots, and they're designated for women only. Now, equality is fine and good, but this is not equality. It's basically superiority. So it's the most gynocentric culture perhaps in all of Asia by far, but it also coincides with the lowest birth rate in all of Asia and in the entire world at just 0.7 births per woman, right? So that's far below replacement. I think you need like a 1.9 or a 2.1 to just have replacement, right? So what else there, gentlemen? There's a lot of interesting, also, with, the Me Too movement and things like that. That's very, very, very big in South Korea. I know of many experiences where, or many stories rather, like I'll give you one. I'll give you two or three. There's a taxi driver. He's got a drunk Korean woman in the car. She starts getting emotional and aggressive. He gets out of the car. There's an argument about payment or something for the taxi, and she literally gets on top of his car and starts stomping with her high heels, right? Destroys his taxi, and he can't really do anything about it because the Me Too movement is so strong here in South Korea that if he were to restrain the woman, he could end up going to jail, and he very well knows that. And that is actually very common and happening far too often here in South Korea. I also have a friend who has a German school where they teach German, right? He's Korean, he speaks perfect German, several other languages as well. His father spoke Hebrew, Chinese, Arabic, German. He was Korean but lived in Germany, and the father, a girl had come to class, and this girl had a hangover, and he was joking around with her and like patted her on the stomach. Oh, you're gonna be okay. Pats her on her stomach, right, in front of the whole class, right? And she ended up reporting him for sexual assault. Okay, I don't think it would have classified as sexual assault, but that was what it passed as. Okay, and he ended up going to jail for a long time, several years. I don't know how long, but it's several years. It's 2, 3, 4, 5 years. Okay, he didn't touch the girl in any private area, anything like that. He didn't kiss the girl unwantedly, nothing like that. Now, did he go too far to touch a student on the stomach? Maybe not. Like 20 years ago, that might have been fine. Nowadays, women are oftentimes looking for reasons to be the victim because they get more attention, more popularity for being a victim. And it's a very, very sad state of things. However, gentlemen, I've never heard of any of these bizarre ordeals with Japanese women, ever. Never even heard of one. Now, I'm sure they do happen as well. Now, I do hear of a lot of Japanese women marrying a Western guy in a Western country and then just saying bye-bye, going back to Japan and never talking to the man again, and then the man never hears or knows of his children anymore. I've heard of that happening a fair amount. That does happen with Japanese women. Korean women, I don't know, but I do know that a lot of men struggle with Korean women. And it's common that if you're in a relationship with a Korean woman, you're probably going to struggle. It's probably going to be very, very difficult. It just goes with the territory, especially as a foreign man. All right, so gentlemen, that about wraps it up. That's Japan versus Korea. Now, which one's best for a long-term relationship? I already told you, but that's going to go to Japanese women on average. Now, that's not to say that you can't meet a great, wonderful Korean woman who's still feminine and can still trust you as a man and allow you to lead the relationship. However, it's far less likely, and it can happen, right? But it's going to require a lot more work. Okay, gentlemen, just know that it's going to require a lot more work. You're going to have to be a maestro. Okay, cuídate mucho, amigos. We'll talk to you next time. 안녕하세요. And we'll see you. Let's see. Should I speak some other languages for you, gentlemen? You want to hear some Japanese? Genki desu ka? Let me teach you a little Japanese. We'll just give you like 20-second Japanese lesson here. Genki ya? Genki desu ka? That's, you good? Good? You good? Genki is good. Genki desu ka? Are you good? That's the most common phrase in Japanese. In Korean, annyeonghaseyo. That's how you say hello. That's how you say good morning. That's how you say how are you. It's the most common phrase. It's just continuously repeated as a way of respect. And the yo at the end signifies respect. If you were talking to a little baby, you could say annyeong, and then annyeonghaseyo is hello. Anyway, that's kind of a little boring, the language there, but you guys stay sharp. And I'm going to do some push-ups here on the mountain. I'm going to run back down, and I'm going to stay after it, all right? All right, God bless. Love you guys. All right, peace.